Okay, thank you, Richard. We're going to invite you on a panel with a bunch of sector experts to build on your insights and explore the challenges out there, how the sector needs to position itself for the future if it's to realise its potential as a driver for economic growth. We're going to call Esta Paschalidis-Chilas, who's the CEO of Canterbury City Community Centre, which is just near me. Kristy Masella, Managing Director of Aboriginal Employment Strategy. Micaela Cronin, CEO of RMIT's Workforce Innovation Development Institute. Rob Stirling, CEO of Network of Alcohol and Other Drug Agencies, and Jenna Roberts, the Head of Innovation, Sane Australia, and Deputy Commissioner of the New South Wales Mental Health Commission. If you guys could come up here, and if I can keep you all to time, because we are running a little over to begin with. We don't have Jenna, so we have a little more space. But nonetheless, so I'm going to ask you all a question, and then I can go round for closing remarks if you feel something has come up that you really want to get off your chest. I'm going to start with Micaela. The Workforce Innovation and Development Institute is focused on supporting the growth and development of the social services workforce. Reflecting on Richard's presentation and from your own data, do you think we really understand the state of social services workforce and what we need to do to secure the future? Is the current workforce crisis just a blip on the radar or something deeper?
Thank you for the question and thank you for the presentation. It was definitely energising. And I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm living and working on Aboriginal lands and pay my respects to elders. I think it's really important to do that because so much of what we're talking about is there is so much work to do with our First Nations people around the oppression that has occurred to them and is ongoing. So the two questions, the second one about is it a blip or is it something deeper? Unfortunately, it's both. The blip is what the last 3 years have been like, and I spent most of that living in Victoria in lockdown. The impact, so what's happening, what we're seeing happening to workforce now is a dramatic escalation of what was already there, and what actually I think to Richard's point about we know what's going on. We've known what's going on in terms of workforce shortages prior to the blip that we're experiencing that is so painful in all of your organisations in terms of workforce shortages. We've known for a very long time what's been coming in terms of growth in what demand is going to be in aged care. You know, what's happening. Just raw numbers about what's happening in our population around people requiring care and the numbers of people who will be in the workforce. Introduction of NDIS, we knew that was going to mean that there would be more investment in provision of disability services. We were going to need more workers. So we've known, and there's been a very long, there's been a long roadmap to where we are now, which one of the things about what's happening now, what's even more painful now, is that every single part of the economy, every single sector we talk a lot to people who employ people and are thinking about their workforces. It doesn't matter who you talk to, they're talking about workforce shortages. It doesn't matter who you talk to, they say we've been carrying workforce shortages for a long time. We employ people in regional countries and we've been holding vacancies in those places for a year. One organisation I was talking to said that we've had nearly 50% vacancy rates. So all of what we know has been coming is now just exacerbated by the blip. The question about do we know enough, your first question about do we know enough about what's going on, I think the question about was an interesting question about the having the visibility of the workforce based on the ANZIC and ANSIC codes. You know, how do we count who is in the workforce? We did some work about 2 years ago now for the Disability Commissioner in Victoria. that there had been extensive consultation about setting up that commission, setting up the worker registration scheme, understanding that that was going to be, was about how do we put in place processes for quality assurance. I met with the new commissioner not that long after he'd started. He said, we'd like you to do a bit of research for us. We have no idea how many people we think should be on the register. We don't know how many disability workers there are in the state. We don't have any really clear grouping of, when we say disability workers should be registered, who are we talking about? Are we talking about somebody who's employed in a school as a disability support worker? What if that person is in a school that is a disability-focused specialist school? Okay, that makes a bit of sense. They should be registered. They should be defined as a disability worker. What about if they're a support person, a teacher in a primary school, state-funded primary school, who've got kids with disability in their class? So we don't count because we don't, to some extent, because we don't value this sector. We don't know how many people there are. We did a snapshot at the beginning of this year on the numbers of what state government wanted to know was vacancy rates, because they were really concerned about services who were not able to deliver services because of the levels of staff vacancies they were carrying. So they asked us to go and count how many vacancies were organisations carrying. So we said, well, we need to know how many jobs there are. And organisations struggled to say state-funded, Commonwealth-funded, funded through other sources, because all of your organisations have to fundraise to provide the other bits, because most of the contracts talk about subsidised funding, not full funding. The example that I remember an economist talking to me about that is, we don't fund, we don't subsidise people who are building roads. We don't say, well, we'll pay you for part of the road, you have to go fundraise to build the rest of the road. We do that for people who are delivering absolutely what government will talk about are critical services. So we don't know enough about how many people are in the workforce. And we absolutely get in our own way about knowing that stuff. The history of the sector is people doing things because they think it's the right thing to do. We come from a charitable approach to delivering services. Most of the organisations have a deep history that they're very proud of about, and I have been very proud of in the organisations I've worked for in the sector, of the values and the history, but we don't pay people properly. We have a very poorly unionised workforce, and if you're trying to compare, for example, the health sector, well, most of those workers are registered with a professional body. So you can go and you can work out how many nurses there are, how many teachers there are. But it's very difficult to go and find how many family violence workers are there, how many disability, how many aged care, how many homelessness. We're doing a piece of work with the specialist homelessness peak around counting how many people work in the homelessness sector. Because if you can't define who the workforce is, it's very difficult to plan for the future, for your organisations to plan for the future, for state government. And part of what happens in child protection and other parts, the other argument government uses, oh, well, it's just a black hole. You just keep asking us for more money and you don't actually deliver any better outcomes for it. So Treasury don't want to know about it and don't want to talk to you about it. So I think that I'm going to stop now. I think that getting a good picture, I feel very passionately that we need to know who our sector is, how many workers, where are they coming from, because the other thing we need to do is make sure that there are career paths, that people are employed in jobs that are sustainable, that mean that they can buy a house near where they work, that they can pay for childcare, and that they know there will be a career path for them. And we, rather than what we do at the moment, which is see it, because we come from such a scarcity, because we're so desperate about losing anybody, Somebody moving from starting in a homelessness service, moving to a mental health service, then doing some family violence work, gradually becoming, learning and becoming a leader, and then leading a service in the sector, we don't see that as a good thing. We don't help build their skills as they do that, because we're desperate we've just lost somebody. They've been poached by another organisation that's able to pay them more because government, it's the flavour of the day, there's been a Royal Commission, whatever it is, and there's more money being invested in that bit, so they can pay a bit more. We need to stop. We need to understand what the sector is, and we need to be able to plan.
Brilliant. Thank you, Micaela.
Sorry.
Rob, NADA commissioned research from Curtin University to help you understand what's going on with the workforce in alcohol and other drug services and what you as a peak organisation need to do to respond. Given what we know about the pressures on health services, community-based AOD services must be in deep need of good people. And I think Micaela touched on this as well, is good people are ripe for picking. It's never been harder to keep employees. So amongst other things, you found that there's a real need to invest in leadership capability and to confront the challenges of competing with the public sector pay scale. What are the priorities you identify to support your sector's growth?
Thank you. And yes, a lot of what the previous two speakers has resonated for me, and definitely is the case in the drug and alcohol sector. Our funding sources are pretty diverse. We get funded through health, we get funded through DCJ, we get funded through the National Indigenous Australians Agency. So our funding mix is pretty chaotic. We call it the house of cards. If you take away one, the whole system's going to collapse. But yeah, I think the data is really important. We kind of know the profile of the drug and alcohol sector, 70% women, 11% Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander now, which is really great. We know that 42% of our workforce identify as having a lived experience of problematic alcohol and other drug use as well, and we kind of know their qualifications. So NADA's done a lot of work, and we do survey them a lot, but we actually don't know the numbers. So I find that really interesting because we don't know how many workers we have. But what we did is we developed a workforce plan for our sector because government weren't going to do it. And then as part of that, we developed a workforce capability framework because we wanted to understand what capabilities does our sector need. It's a great framework. But then NADA is also a not-for-profit. We're a small not-for-profit ourselves. And we thought, shit, we can't implement this because we can't do all the work. Our members need to do the work. We represent 75 NGOs, ranging from small to medium. And so we thought we need the managers and leaders of our sector to support the implementation of this capability framework. But we don't really understand that, so we engaged Curtin to do this study. And what we anecdotally knew is that there aren't pathways into management and leadership positions in our sector. You're a social worker, you're a counsellor, you demonstrate some motivation, you get moved into a management position, but you're never trained in it. And so unsurprisingly, what we found when we did the survey is that most of the people that we spoke to through survey and through interview psychologically didn't identify as a leader. And what we know is to be a good leader, you need to think you're a leader. And so what we've identified is that we need to do a lot of work around, yes, we need to do training in management and leadership, but we also need to do mentoring and coaching and create social environments for managers and leaders to get together so psychologically they see themselves as a leader. Yeah. I think this idea that leaders just emerge like a flower is probably not what
There's also probably something in just a psychological difference in the almost narcissism kind of that you associate with leadership things is almost the opposite of the altruism that drives people. And that doesn't, and I suspect though the narcissists actually make terrible bloody leaders, but it means those other people need to be encouraged more because they don't see themselves as those type of people.
Absolutely. And I think, remember years ago the MHCC had some leadership training which many people in the AOD sector got access to as well. But what we see from government is this, here's a bit of money to look at workforce development, but it's one-off, it's not sustainable. We know that workforce development needs to be ongoing because we need to grow the workforce. What we're seeing is a product of a workforce that hasn't had a lot of attention for a long time. We were talking about before COVID, it was, bordering on a crisis. Now it's absolutely a crisis. So in the drug and alcohol sector, we just had the government announce the week before last $500 million to drug and alcohol services, which we waited 2 years from a special commission. And I think that goes to the stigma and discrimination that happens to people who use drugs and the consequence that has on the workforce who support these people. It's not an attractive sector to work in. And so I just think they're talking about all these new services, and I'm thinking, where are these people coming from to have these new rehabs and these new detox services, because the current infrastructure isn't coping. I'm meeting with Minister Hazzard tomorrow, and my question is going to be, don't start new services yet. Apply at least 15% to all of your current grants, not for nothing, but so they can talk about how they're going to increase the wages of their people, so they can attract people, so they can compete with the public sector. The Special Commission report pretty much outlined all the recommendations of what we need to do.
Are they unionised? I mean, I know aged care isn't childcare, but what about?
Different unions, but not particularly, no.
No, so there isn't one that really sort of
not just
pushes.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So we don't do the bargaining.
Yeah,
That's what we talked about. We're terrible at bargaining.
Yeah, you actually need a kind of a sector union that sort of helps with that, and which we would also, I mean, obviously I'm completely biased when it comes to unions. I'm just got my thing on that one.
I mean, it annoys me, like for years they've been talking about moving to 4 to 5 year contracts for NGOs. I mean, that's something small that government could change very easily, and they kind of use this thing around, performance. I think if an NGO is not performing, do something about it. Don't say, oh, we're going to put you on a 1 year contract because we're concerned about your performance. Exactly. Do something about it and move the sector into 5 year rolling contracts so they can be sustainable and they can do proper business and workforce planning.
Very quickly, I mean, you've got to be really careful. Don't get me wrong, I think unionisation's a big part of this, but I call this policy deathmatch, where health gets played against education, aged care gets played against, unless we collect a shitload more tax, you're all going to lose. Lock it in. It doesn't matter how good your sector, your union is, it's going to come at someone else's expense unless we collect more revenue. And until, I'm not persuading people, but the individual unions can't actually solve this problem, right? And don't get me wrong, that's where, trades councils and ACTU and, Sally McManus was at our revenue summit. I'm not saying unions don't get this, but you've got to see how good people are at dividing you and beating you. Right? Because they're winning. They're winning, and they do it by saying, oh, this budget we think will be an education budget. That's the sound of most of you losing. Right? Until you hear this budget is going to be a revenue budget, you're losing.
I'm going to move on to Esta now, although I have one question for you, Richard, I'm dying to ask. Should aged care and child care be taken out of the private sector?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I thought you'd agree. Yeah. Because I see massive tax revenues just going into pockets of really rich people providing shitty services.
I saw a childcare company buy a $20 million house yesterday.
Just outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. Okay. That's my bugbear. Esta, you've just come back from a major conference on aged care and the workforce, and you're currently working hard to recruit a workforce that matches your community. As a smaller provider embedded in Canterbury, Bankstown, what are your big workforce challenges right now? What are the practical activities and policy settings that would help?
Big question.
Big one, I know.
Hi everyone, I'm Esta. It's great to be here. I was online yesterday and I really, really enjoyed the day. And I've been around a long time, so for me to say I enjoyed the day and I got a lot out of it, means you must have had a great day. We're not always glass half full, are we? I think I just wanted to start by acknowledging country and just saying that, as a child of migrants, I do this very deliberatively because I was educated in the New South Wales education system, which taught me very little about First Australians, and I think we're on a long journey to learning and listening. So I'm the CEO of a great organisation called Canterbury City Community Centre. We celebrate 50 years this year, and I think it's a testimony to the resilience of people in this room. We sustain and maintain and develop despite cycles of reform, which is largely unnecessary. I've been around 35 years. I don't think I've read a Productivity Commission report or a Commission report that has told me something I don't know. So I guess for me, that's a really big question. But when you asked it and when I read it the other day, I start from within. And I take Richard's challenge because just like government has choices, we have choices. And I think part of what we've done, and I've been reflecting on this a lot doing an MBA and having come out of a very large not-for-profit I co-founded 20 years ago and have spent probably the last 2 years really deeply thinking about, well, what is it that I can do as a leader that actually changes our course? And I think part of our error has been we've become captive to narratives that aren't actually our own. Mm-hmm. I think that's the first thing. I think we believe that somehow a different sector is going to teach us something better and shiny and new. And it has taught me, corporatisation of my sector that I've lived through and led through has taught me a lot. But it's also, I guess, taken me away from my core mission. And I think we have to, in order to keep good people, in order to pipeline people, keep good people, we have to practice our values. We have to practice our values. We have to listen to our people. We have to trust our people. We cannot control every movement they make, which is what some organisations try to get us to do, because we have to be better and bigger than Joe Bloggs down the road. I'm going more deeply into taking a more social impact approach to the work of our organisation. It's not about having to do everything. It's about doing what we do well and giving our workforce clarity how their role and the work that they're busy doing every day actually connects to the values and the mission and our broader impact in society. And when I took over the organisation 18 months ago, I was absolutely thrilled to be invited to my predecessor's farewell. And I tell this story because it's really important for us to name stuff. And when they did a Vox Pop and they asked the staff, does anyone want to say anything about Liz? So Liz had been the CEO for 22 years, extraordinary human being. I knew her from my first CEO gig and she attracted me to the role, right? And a guy got up and he must have been, he's one of my senior staff now, he must have been about, 56 at the time, 57. He probably had a bit of a hard go. And he said, I just want to say that Liz's leadership has actually meant it's one of the few organisations in my community services career where I have felt psychologically safe. Oh. Right? Now, I had tears in my eyes. Liz, of course, was a babbling mess. But I just thought to myself, wow, have we lost sight of the basics here? I hadn't been a CEO for 7 years, so I'd kind of disconnected from, senior leadership a little bit. And I thought, gosh, have we lost our way a little bit in this time? Like, what's actually going on in our sector? Like we need to understand what we're doing better. So I guess for me, Dee, it's about us being really honest about what it is that we think our value is, how we communicate that value to our people, how we let people go when it's the right time for them. We don't see that as you were saying, Micaela, it's not a strike against my organisation's name that someone goes on to bigger and better. I should be proud of that. I had a small part in that and I should be really happy about that. But I also think that competition has meant that we're not collaborating like we should. I've seen it. Like I said, 7-year hiatus in being a CEO. I see it CEO to CEO now. The conversations are not as robust. They're not as honest. We don't talk about price, right? We don't talk about salary range. We don't have the same kind of conversations we've had in the past. So I think there's some internal work we need to do. But on the question of what, the second part of your question, which was around, the policy settings, I think that, the big issue, say, in aged care, which is the largest part of what we do, community and home care, and the ACPA conference I was at last week, which is our newly formed peak, which is a really, really good move, which is another part, I guess, the puzzle, is having good peak organisations that advocate for a sector in unity. I think part of it is that, the commercialisation of the sector has brought down unit costing, has meant that you've got a lot of operators coming in and leaving the industry within, 2 to 5 years. Those of us that have got skin in the game stay, but it's a hard slog in between. Yeah. So the front of mind issue for me at the moment is not just the sustainability of my workforce, but the sustainability of my organisation.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because, policies come and go, tenders come and go, but we're still here. There's nothing funding us to still be here. We need a model that's fixed and variable funding. It has to be from every level of government. It has to be understood that investing in us for a fixed amount that supports our infrastructure, that supports us to open the door, is an investment in the community. We can't give out those rat tests. We can't just have a chat with the person who's lonely that drops in at Lakemba and just wants to say hi. Like, we are becoming less able to do that stuff because all our funding is tied to a box of some sort that we have to tick. So we have to have conversations about fixed and variable. We've got to have conversations about portable long service leave, workforce strategies, capability frameworks, sharing workforces. You know, if I don't have an Italian speaker, where do I go for my Italian speaking older person in the home? I go to a contracted provider who's private. Why aren't I going to a colleague who might have a pool of bilingual workers and her Italian worker might only get 4 hours a week? But if we share that person, they'll get another 4 hours a week and I won't lose them to someone else. But we're not having those conversations. So I think part of it is a challenge for us.
Yeah.
Like Richard said, government has choices. That was pretty much your thread. They have choices. We also have choices. How we choose to lead our organisations is our most important choice.
Absolutely, and I think that got raised yesterday, this funding model that inherently breeds competitiveness is just unhealthy. But I thought you raised something really positive and it's worth thinking about. In recent studies with women, why women stay and why women leave workforce, money wasn't the top. It was relationships with managers. And for people in your industry, that's probably something that you can sort of beat other people at, if you like. So foster those really good relationships with people. And as you're right, when people leave, and I've seen it in the ad industry, some people get really shitty when someone leaves. And I've made a point never to do that because, hey, you never know when they're going to come back with even better skills. And it's a way to sort of, hey, it's treating people decently as well. But those sort of the soft skills that you guys have, because it's why you're in this field, are also one of your advantages. And it's probably something to remember that. We're going to go on to Kristy now, who's recently at the NGO Roundtable of Aboriginal Employment and Leadership. Now, you talked about the need for social sector organisations to step up and work alongside Aboriginal communities to offer employment. What are organisations doing right and what do they need to change to become an employer of choice when it comes to attracting, recruiting and retaining staff?
Thanks. Well, g'day everyone. Really great to be here this morning in a room full of allies. So often this world we all work in, it feels very lonely. So I'm feeling the love today and appreciating all the great dialogues and teasing out some of these issues that we face every day. So I'm very privileged to be part of a wonderful organisation called the AES, and we are celebrating 25 years this year. And thank you. And I love to say that we're celebrating, but you know, it's been a hard slog, and every day, every week, it's a hard slog, and we feel the burn of the short, irregular government funding, and currently we are in a bit of a crisis in between contracts with funding providers. So, but you know, we talked about those values, and AES, we live and breathe those values about serving our community, and you know, often frightens me to think if we weren't here, who else would be supporting our community? So, yes. A couple of interesting stats we know, and you know, NCOS have been great in sharing data with all of us around this stuff, that we know over the next 10 years we're going to need, you know, 100,000 people to be able to support us, maintain our valuable service in this sector. In New South Wales alone, we're needing almost 300% growth in this type of workforce. We also know that women make up 4 out of 5 roles in this sector. What I see in my world is that Aboriginal women make up a significant proportion of our workforce, not only in the Aboriginal social services sector, but broadly. And I think what's, again, frightening to me to think about is that Aboriginal women are the most disadvantaged group in our country. Shame on that. Shame on this country. And here we are, excuse my emotions. And here we are in a system where we have the most vulnerable in our communities, supporting the most vulnerable in our communities. And again, it saddens me to see how much our government values the most vulnerable when this is how we're treated. Shameful, shameful, shameful. Okay, I'm doing Richard's approach with making everyone angry and sad, and go to the good stuff too, right? But you know what, the strength of this service sector, particularly my service sector, is that we have big-hearted, passionate Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people who feel a great sense of purpose by helping others, and that's the strength of our service. And I loved hearing the descriptions about working together, and I think what I've seen working really well is within the very small amount of resources we have to survive and try to make an impact and support our communities, is that we work together. That, you know, we're trying to support people in our organisations on the smell of an oily rag, right? We're still using that terminology, but it's great when you reach out to other allies in the sector and say, hey, how can we share these limited resources to support our organisations, not only to survive, but to keep doing more? Disadvantage is not going away in this country. So if we don't do it, if government aren't stepping up, you know, what's this world going to look like in 10 years' time? So really value the partnerships, the strategic alliances of this sector. I think we've got to lean on each other. Lean on organisations in a good way. Don't put more burden on Aboriginal organisations because we don't have resources either. But how can we be more strategic together? How can we form strategic alliances, share resources? If we're going to be delivering training, why not invite other organisations to say, hey, do you want to come along too? We're going to be doing something on trauma-informed approaches to our services. Do you want to send someone along? Are you doing something that my crew can come along and also learn from? Can we just have more time like this, thank you, NCOS, to have yarns and feel empowered, get ideas, get energy from each other so we can take back to our organisations to refuel us? And I am getting better. I'm loving the fact that I'm getting better at asking for money. Like, you know, I think for me, as an Aboriginal woman, we do this work because we have so much. Our identity is linked to having social responsibility to each other, right? That's part of our identity. But, you know, it frustrates me when government don't value supporting disadvantaged people. So, you know, hey, I'm learning to get better to ask for money, and I think we all got to do that. And, you know, we use the fact that, I'm proud to say at AES, for every $1 of government funding we get, I know I've done my work on this, you'll be very happy, we deliver $4.50 in return back to community. So, but we're not valued. So, thank you.
Kristy, how, if we know there's not enough Indigenous people in this field, full stop, what can other organisations do to attract and retain good Indigenous staff?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? We don't have the high wages. We're competing against the public service. We're competing against corporate Australia now, who also have all these sexy raps who want to say, we're employing this amount of Aboriginal people. We can't compete, right? So, you know, we go back to purpose and say, you know, there's more value in this world than, you know, egos and profiles and how much you earn, right? We all need to make a living, and we want to buy houses and improve living conditions in our communities, but we can't compete. So it's about quality of work, really understanding, as Esta said, you know, giving people the importance of knowing the value that they're contributing back and sharing those with our kids to say the work that we do makes a difference. And you can't put a price on that, right? And, you know, flexible and having that safety and being creative and innovative within limited resources, right? I often say great stress creates great innovation sometimes because you have to find a solution, right? So, but culture is very important to AES. We've had people who've stayed with us who are very talented, smart, people who could go on and have very successful careers in corporate and public service, and yet they stay with the AES because they believe in the work that we do.
Right, yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And Richard, we'll come back to you now. John Robertson, in his closing remarks yesterday, said people need to get better at saying no to the government, because the government will always go to these nice people who'll just do whatever they're asked to do, even if they don't have the money to do it, if it's out their remit, and then they mightn't do a good job because it's not, they don't have the money and whatever, and then of course that's a terrible cycle to be in, because then the government's like, oh, they're not very good. What can organisations do, or how can they go harder in discussions with the government? What kind of leverage have they got?
Yeah, great question. And look, it's really hard because all of the wonderful presentations you've just heard start with care and mission. And it's very hard to believe for a minute, let alone convince a government, that you would walk away if they don't give you enough money. And their job is to give you as little as they think they can get away with. So this is, just to be clear, it's just an overt exploitation of power.
Sure is.
Right? And it's built on your care and your compassion and your passion and your commitment, and it is used against you. And it is not an accident. I remember talking to a group years ago, I was in New South Wales, I'll be very vague. They provided a wonderful service, and the government announced they were going to kind of go to tender and, you know, make a competitive process out of it. And these people were terrified that they were going to lose their funding. And I said, just don't bid. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, look around, this place is crap. You know, everyone's working 5 days a week, you're paying them 3, the carpet's ripped, your photocopier's broken. Do you think anyone is going to bid lower than you? No, I mean this. Like, do you, all right, just walk away. They will beg you to come back.
Yeah.
They will give you money. Oh, we couldn't do that. Right, that's why you're going to get nothing. Now, I'm not criticising them for caring. I'm just spelling it out for you, right? They were like, we couldn't do that. It's like, you know, imagine you walk into a car yard and say, I love this car. This is the car. This is the perfect car for me. I promised it to my partner. I'm about to buy it. Let's haggle. No, you wouldn't do it, would you? But Minister, I'm committed. I'm passionate. I love this work. My whole organisation, we're mission driven. I need more money or I'll keep doing it. No, I'm not mocking. No, I'm not. It's horrible.
Are you in our heads, Richard?
I'm in your sector. I really am. So that's why you need peak bodies. That's why you need to change the whole conversation into a conversation about why they don't have enough money because of their choices, why they can afford to build this and not. You have to make it about them and their abuse of power, not about you and what you like, because they know you're bluffing.
And this goes back to yesterday's conversation about trying to work within a system that's fundamentally flawed and not set up to advantage you in any way, shape or form is never going to work. You actually have to start addressing...
But it's not fundamentally flawed. It is perfect.
For them.
For them.
Yeah, exactly that, yes.
No, like they didn't stumble into this.
Yep.
They did not start. They had strategy meetings. They had this group. They figured out how to divide and conquer you. They came up with contracting out. They came up with short-term contracts because it works for them. So you have to change the narrative. You have to change the conversation.
You have to change the system.
You need block grants. You need duration. And until you collectively all demanding that stuff, you will, by design, by clever people who get paid more than you, be played off against each other.
Richard, they can't even get CPI right.
Yeah, well,
You know,
I know. And
the CPI rate this year is based on what contract it is.
Look,
which level of government?
I'm not blaming any individual organisation. I'm certainly not blaming a peak body. It took decades to get you into such a weak position. No, it did. And you won't get out of it next week. No. But you need to start boxing out of that corner.
But I mean, I do agree that we have a role, but I also think government has a role. And I just think about the competitive tendering environment. And I always say to my members, you need to add in the back end office stuff, you know, your quality, your accreditation, your other components, you know, the data collection so you can demonstrate your outcomes. But the reality is, in a competitive funding environment, services will try and do a cheaper price, which they then shave off those things, so they're paying for service delivery. So we kind of need government to put in the tenders things that they know what it takes to deliver a quality service are these components of an organisation.
We have to stop undercutting each other.
Yeah.
We just have to, right? That's the point that Richard's making about not bidding. I was leading an organisation a while ago, and I'm going to try and be vague too about there was a particular service, and there were only 4 organisations who were going to bid for this service. And we'd been talking about price. What does it really cost to deliver this? And I got a phone call at the end of the process, and I got a phone call from the senior bureaucrat who said, look, I'm really sorry. Yours was absolutely trauma-informed, the best model, we loved it, but we've given it to the organisation that they undercut us. They said they would do it for less than it cost to deliver it, and they paid for it. This is a lost lead. We want to get into this, you know, service delivery.
It doesn't work like that though, because the next job, they never let you catch up that loss. Like, it's actually poor business in the long run.
Yeah, but if you're big though, see, like, it's a lost lead.
Yeah.
It's what Micaela just said. They'll do it because they'll earn it in a different. I don't have that capacity.
Yeah.
A loss is a loss. But let's look at the job network first iteration, right? That's how long I've been around. Pretty scary. What was it called then? I can't remember.
It was Job Network.
That job, okay, I still call it
Tony
Job
Abbott.
Network. Anyway, let's look at that, right? So there was 3 organisations that I was pretty heavily kind of across at the time. I was heading up a migrant resource centre, and a couple of them played in the space for a bit. Halfway through the contract went, this is not viable, we can't do this. Like, it's not going to work. And the policing aspect is so rigorous that it's anti our values, and it's not valuable from a financial point of view. So they withdraw halfway through the contract. About 8 months later, what happened? Does anyone remember? The contracts got topped up.
Yeah, right.
So it's not even an equal playing field at the outset.
Because, yeah, right.
The rules change. They get soft.
Yeah.
Again, choices. Shivers, it's going to fail. We better
top it up.
We better top it up. We better back it in.
It's a hell of a
Meanwhile,
risk though,
you've
isn't
lost
it?
3 highly skilled providers in southwestern Sydney where unemployment rates were very high in proportion to the national average. They're out of the game. They're not going to re-enter.
Yeah,
it's a failed experiment, but we're still doing it.
Yeah. Yes, no. My main competitor is a lot cheaper than me, and I decided years ago I'm not dropping.
No.
They can give it to me or not, but then I'm not at the bare bones living on smell of oil rags. So that is, I'm, you know, in a unique position. But, you know that to drop down, yes, you could do it cheaper, but you'd do a worse job, and the client will remember not that it was a cheap job, but that it was a shit job. But, you know, that's a luxury I have that you guys simply don't, and that's not fair. We are now, before morning tea, we're going to have a poem to bring us all up. You may do that. Have you got a mic? Or you can come up and have this one. Karen, why don't you come up and have this one?
Sorry, Fia is someone Fia's been online for the last 2 days, and I want to give her a shout out and just read out her question and comment. She says, to them the mainstream is right, you know, and they get it right. So how can we as small organisations become known to them and get them to see the quality, and I think government is the context of them, and get them to see the quality of work that is working well with the real people? How do we get acknowledged and recognised when we're small and we're not kind of visible to mainstream organisations? And Fia is currently running a service voluntarily for people from Pacific Islander communities because she's not found anyone who's doing a good job of culturally appropriate child and family services. Fia stopped doing it for free, but she wants to know, like, how do you actually, as a small organisation, crack in to this conversation?
Find, like we've all been there, right? I think find like-minded people. from organisations. They'll be right near you. You might not even know they're there. And start talking to them. It's a great question. I think it's there's a lot of, over the years, there's been a lot of tension between, if you take sort of multicultural community organisations that I've had a bit of a hand in, there's sometimes been inherent tension between those of us that are funded to do the work in a professional sense and those of us that aren't funded to do the work and are still doing it. And in COVID, I think there was actually an undue burden on the unfunded part of our sector, in actual fact. And government just kept going to them constantly, and probably people like the person who sent through the question. And I think it's our responsibility as people that actually do get some resources to actually reach out to people like that and say, let's talk, how can we help?
And I guess that's where NCOS can come in as the peak body to make those connections.
How can we help? How can we work together?
Yeah.
Is there anything that we have that's of value to you? Not to go on top of, but to say, is there anything we can help with?
Yeah, that's good. Right, we're going to ask Kristen Hayward from Expand now to come up and give us a little poem before we go to morning tea. And morning tea is going to be 20 minutes long. So if you can make sure you're back in here in 20 minutes. That would be 10:30. That would be 10:50 because I can't count.
I just want to dedicate this to all of you who are holding sacred spaces for our most vulnerable. And I just wanted to share that I wrote this poem after I was told to be humble, to not have a voice, to be more humble. Is this the deal, that all you want from me is my humility? To hide triumphs that were birthed from crawling out of bed when shame felt like an anchor pressing cruelly on my head? To conceal ideas, patterns, predictions, streaming in an infinite sea, fueled by dyslexia, dyscalculia, and ADHD, leaving me looking stupid, but knowing I was anything but when the ideas pointed toward an archaic theory to disrupt. Is this the deal, that all you want from me is my humility? Yes? So where then does this wild passion bursting from my blooming heart go? Back to where it was once trapped, where it was once crammed under the sticky, heavy shame of walrus, weirdo, crybaby, stupid, where it was stuffed even further down, bound and gagged by the cautions of be nice, don't make a fuss, and just walk away. The same dark place my grandmother's passion burned out long before her wild heart could light up a stage. Is this really the deal, that all you want from me is my humility? Okay, let's negotiate. You become the silent present witness to hold this sacred space, and I'll expose my unhealed wounds, my disappointments, my shameful stories, my lost dreams. I'll expose the unrelenting attempts at creating something out of nothing with my burning passion to make a difference in this place. I'll expose the brilliant mind hidden behind the scatterbrained, slow-talking, sensitive chick. And then, in the space between the booming crescendo of my story so far and the graceful lull of this piece, I'll give you all what you so desperately want from wildish me. I'll give you all of my humility.
Beautiful.